From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, and welcome to the 2024 McNair Conversation on the American South. My name is Joel Samuels, and I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm delighted to welcome you here this evening to what I know will be a riveting conversation between Chief Justice Jean Toal and Dr. Mark Smith. I'd like to extend a special welcome to some of our distinguished guests this evening, including the Chief Justice's family and friends, and I.S. Levy Johnson, law partner to Bill Toal, and a lion of our community. And it's very rare to have three generations of deans of arts and sciences in a room, so it's my pleasure to welcome Marianne Fitzpatrick, now vice provost, and Lacey Ford here as well. I also want to thank all of you for being here, for being part of this conversation, being part of a conversation that celebrates the history of our state, the impact of important pioneers in South Carolina. Each year, the Institute for Southern Studies and the College of Arts and Sciences hosts the McNair Conversations on the American South. Made possible by the generosity of the late South Carolina Governor Robert McNair, the McNair Conversations is a series honoring individuals who have made a lasting and significant contribution to the American South. They are recorded in front of a live audience, that's you, and later broadcast on the Institute's highly successful Take on the South podcast, which I'm sure Mark will talk about. Take on the South, take on the South. Our 2024 McNair Honoree, Jean Toal, needs no introduction in this room, and yet I have the pleasure of introducing her. Chief Justice Toal received her BA degree in philosophy, a reminder of the impact of the liberal arts on great minds, in 1965 from Agnes Scott College, where she served on the Judicial Council, the National Supervisory Board of the U.S. National Student Association, and she played goalie for the field hockey team. She received her JD degree in 1968 from the University of South Carolina. I didn't know this was possible, by the way, where she served as managing editor, lead articles editor, and book review editor. Usually one person, that's three people, one person doing three people's job, quite extraordinary, of the South Carolina Law Review. She is a member of the Order of the Coif, the Mortar Board, and Phi Beta Kappa. When she graduated from the USC School of Law in 1968, Chief Justice Toal was just one of 11 women actively practicing law in the state of South Carolina. She has argued cases before the United States Supreme Court. She served in the South Carolina House of Representatives for 13 years, and she became the first female justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court in 1988 and the first female Chief Justice in 2013. She is also the first Native Colombian and first Roman Catholic to serve on the South Carolina's highest court. She is truly a political and legal trailblazer. Her achievements are significant and enduring, and few truly have left a mark and legacy on this state. It is an honor to be with you, Justice Toal. She will be interviewed tonight by the college's own Dr. Mark Smith, Carolina Distinguished Professor of History and Director of the Institute for Southern Studies. Professor Smith teaches American social and cultural history with an emphasis on the American South and sensory history. When Mark spoke to our Board of Visitors last spring, they were also intrigued by learning of his book titled The Smell of Battle, The Taste of Siege, a sensory history of the Civil War, that we sent a copy to each of them for their holiday gift from the college at under the $25 limit that the university imposes. He has lectured in Europe, throughout the United States, Australia, and China, and his work has been translated into Chinese and Korean, among other languages. It's also safe to say that his melodious voice is probably the least likely of a British accent who holds more knowledge about the American South and Civil War than most Americans. So what does it take to become a leading jurist in the South? How does a Southern woman navigate the highest levels of the law and politics to become the state's first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Does growing up in the South help or hinder such achievements? Together tonight, we will learn the answers to these and other questions and more as we listen to a conversation between old friends, Mark and Chief Justice Toal. Please come and join us.
Good evening. Said in my best Mississippi accent. I want to say a few thank yous before we get going. It takes a lot to pull this off. Joel Samuels has been absolutely a stalwart for the conversations on the American South. The communications people in the College of Arts and Sciences are second to none, my colleagues, and thanks to all of you for being here. It means a lot. Jean, I don't know where to begin with you. You've done so much, and you continue to do so much. Many people here tonight know you, and they know you very well. But we have some younger people here too, the students. And it is my hope for the McNair Conversations generally, and especially this conversation, that we can begin to bridge a generational gap. People who know you, but not as well. And maybe some legacies can be instrumental in educating them. So it is Women's History Month. It's also this month where basketball is played, I believe.
The best.
Yeah, something like that. And I'm going to touch on a few of these things. But I want to begin with this. If you see up there, there is a story that says something like, she was always strong-willed. And I went through the newspapers and I found these stories and I put them up there because I think they kind of capture something of your arc. First of all, Jean, do you think you are strong-willed? And if you are, why? Where did it come from?
Well, yes, I think I am. I can't tell anything but the truth in front of all these people I know so well. But my father had a lot of influence on me. And he emphasized being strong-minded, having a purpose, getting things done. And he believed in me. And a lot of his generation treated their daughters differently than they treated their sons. He had mostly daughters. And he treated us as equals in the sense that we were both entitled to opinions and entitled to express ourselves freely to him. And that wasn't the relationship all of my friends had with their dad. And I think that really propelled me to have self-confidence. And I think that's, in me, that shows itself as being strong-willed, as they say.
And tenacious and passionate too, right? Well, of course, and I think this has kind of veined your entire career, right? Joel mentioned where you went to school, Agnes Scott College and here. How formative was that schooling for you? I mean, what are the bits that still stay with you today?
Well, the early 60s were the golden age of single-sex or single-gender colleges in this country. There were a lot of excellent women's and men's colleges, and Agnes Scott was one of them. Quite frankly, I don't think I would have blossomed as much in a coeducational environment. I might have been strong-willed, but I didn't have anything like the self-confidence I developed in a place where women were valued, where women were encouraged, where there were no barriers to taking part in anything in college life. And we had some wonderful professors, many of them women, who really modeled for us what it means to approach academics deeply and purposefully and thoughtfully. So I couldn't have had a better environment for me. It's not for everyone, but for me, it really raised the level of my thought about what I would do with my life and what I wanted to explore intellectually.
And Joel gave an interesting statistic. When you went into the profession of law, there were only 11 other women in that profession
in the active practice of this state. That was it. Out of a bar of 4,000, there weren't but 40 of us licensed to practice law. You know, it's a funny thing, Mark. I had thought I would go to graduate school in philosophy and be a college professor. That was a job track that a lot of women looked at. I applied to the University of Michigan, and I got in to the philosophy department there. And so that's what I thought I would do. In my senior year, a judge, who was the father of one of my friends, called me into his study when I took his daughter home from Agnes Scott that Thanksgiving and said, "I want to talk to you for a minute. I want you to think about law school." And I said, "Judge, there's no lawyers in my family. I'm going to grad school in philosophy." He said, they'll give you a pass. They'll put it on hold. He said, "I've looked, and Emory has got a course in constitutional law, and I want you to take that course the winter quarter." And boy, I started thinking about that. I got back to school. I had to do a whole lot of rearranging to get that course in. But Judge Rosen said that's what I ought to do. So I said, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. Oh, I wasn't in that thing but a week. I said, wow, this is what I was meant to do. So I scrambled around to take the LSAT late and got in. And I called Michigan. They said they would put it on hold for a year. And the rest is history. Doesn't that show you what a mentor can do for a young person? All of us have those kind of stories, I feel sure. Those of us of a certain age, like many of us are here. But that taught me so much about what I needed to do with young people. That just changed my whole life. What's that? Up a little bit? I'm gonna get Megan. She is in charge of the system. So, but
she's on it.
You know, it's wonderful you do say that because I've never been accused of not talking loud enough. So, thanks. Okay, thanks.
So, what I'm hearing here, Jean, is that this professor basically denied you a very lucrative career as a philosophy. I mean, outrageous behavior, really, if you think about it.
Here's the coda to that. It shows you how long even a women's college had to go to really think about women in real positions of authority. Yeah. I went back after I'd made all these arrangements to go to law school, and the career advisor called me into her office, Ms. Murphy, and she said, "Jean, I've heard you going to law school and you're going to throw away philosophy." And I said, "Well, I'm going to give it a shot." She said, "Jean, just think about this a little bit. You know, we're really not accepted in the legal profession. And you may be in for a life of unhappiness and lack of success. And you would be great as a philosophy professor." Boy, how about not taking that advice from that well-meaning woman who is going to tell me, "Don't go to law school. They won't like us." And the legal profession didn't accept us very strongly at that point. I asked Ruth Bader Ginsburg how it was.
So when you were at law school here, how many other women were in law school with you?
About 7. Seven or 9, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Remarkable. Let me shift gears just a bit. How important is your faith to your politics and your legal profession? I mean, does it wane in any way, Jean? We go to the same church. We see each other there. I have Henry VIII to blame, but nonetheless, how does it inflect your worldview and what you do?
Well, I am a lifelong Catholic and a very believing Catholic, and the church still gives me such comfort. It's awfully nice to be with my daughter and her children and sit at 8 o'clock Mass together. The church has always been, and the faith has been an important part of my life. But I learned when I married a good Presbyterian that there are lots of paths of faith. We raised our girls to go to both of those churches, Shandon Presbyterian and St. Joseph's, but it strengthened my faith to be married to such a believer as Bill. So faith is important, but it doesn't have to be strictly denominational. I guess I learned the nuns won't teach you that, but that's the fact. Thank goodness we got Francis now. He knows that.
Well, he does, and certainly they will teach you more than the Church of England does. That's not really saying that much, to be honest with you. This is the McNair Conversations on the American South, and plainly you are of the South and from the South. How do you see Southern? You're a Southerner, but what does that mean to be a Southerner as opposed to a Northerner or somebody not from the South for you?
Well, I place so much of what it means to be a Southerner, this Southerner, in the place and time in which I lived. I mean, let's remember that when I was a child and my sister Lila was a child, racial segregation was enforced as a matter of law, not just as a matter of prejudice and feeling, but as a matter of law in this state. Racial segregation was enforced. I remember as if it were yesterday in 1954 when Brown versus the Board of Education was decided. My grandmother had a very new television, and my Uncle Carrington just put it in the house. And she sat there and watched as it was announced. Oh, my goodness. She had the old-fashioned Southern attitudes about everything. And she was just ranting and raving and everything. And I was 10, and I said, Grandmother, what would be wrong with the Negro children going to school with us? Oh, man, she was so mad with me. She got out the Octagon soap. You know what that means? Wash your mouth out with Octagon soap. I survived it. But what really was a learning thing for me, when Papa came to get me, we would go over, Lil and I would go to grandmother's all the time with our cousins and spend the afternoon. Papa would pick us up and take us home. When Papa came to get me, she was still mad as a hornet, and she told him what that arrogant daughter of his had said to her, and wasn't he horrified? And he took her into a place that we weren't in, and there were some voices raised. And when I got home, he said, "Child, you should never be rude to your grandmother, but your opinions are your own." Now, that's a pretty strong thing for a father to tell a child in 1954 in Columbia, South Carolina, with attitudes that people had. But it freed us as children to know that our parents wanted us to think broadly about things. That doesn't mean they were the most open-minded people in the world, but they wanted us to be.
And that's a legacy for you, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. You know, and a lot of what I did, we had screaming and yelling fights. When I got involved with civil rights work, oh my goodness. We would have some firm family conversations that would make me mad and make Mama and Papa mad. But
I was about to ask, how did that look at the dinner table?
Well, you try to keep your mouth shut at the dinner table, because sometimes after dinner,
Right.
you'd get into some pretty strong conversations and arguments. But,
So your parents, your family, huge influence. Your trajectory is kind of shaped, your thinking is shaped by them. As you go through your long and distinguished career, could you share with us some of the people who had a real impact on you? Obviously, the judge at the college, but once you're in the profession, who are the kind of signal people who that person really helped me or changed my view, or I looked up to them and used them as a model?
Well, gosh, a lot of people.
I'm sure.
A lot of people, but in the early days, a partner at Hainsworth firm where I went to begin with, I was youngest person at the Haynesworth firm. It was the biggest law firm in the state, and I was number 16, so that shows you how different firms were. This lecture and this award is named for one of the real giants of the profession, Robert McNair, a dear friend of my parents, very, very creative South Carolina leader. But what is not thought about Bob McNair, but was a big influence on me, is he was the first person to start a real regional law firm that looked broadly at the practice of law with clients in business and industry, with clients in untraditional planning of the development of cities and the development of manufacturing, the development of bringing business to South Carolina. Bob McNair had that kind of vision when he started the McNair Law Firm. In fact, I'm really proud to have Franny Heiser and Liz Crum here tonight, who are two senior partners in that firm, because what McNair also did, that was the most open firm to women in the state. And the phrase McNair women is something we know about. Maybe not all the guys in this world knew about it, but we knew what Bob McNair did to promote women in the profession. You know, my first mentor was Jean Galloway. She was, you know, at the Haynesworth firm was a unicorn. She graduated from Erskine at the age of 15. She graduated from law school at such a young age that she had to wait a year before they would let her take the bar examination, because they had an age restriction on when you could take the bar and be a lawyer. Some of those early women who gave me encouragement. But you know, the other thing was, when I went to law school, of course it was practically all guys, but we as a class, the class of 1968, really bonded with each other, and we thought very deeply about what we wanted to do in politics, what we wanted to do in leadership roles in the state. We thought about those things very seriously, as only students can do that are young people and haven't been discouraged in life, but just have the get up and go about them. So people like Bill Toal, my dear classmate and my dear husband of 56 years, they treated me as an equal, and they looked after me. And if something happened that wasn't quite right in a courthouse, I had a friend I could call on to help me out. That was very different from the experience that women just preceding me had done. So I had that group of guys that treated me as an equal.
So then you enter the rough and tumble world of Southern politics. And I know a little bit about this, but not as much as you, but really, you are the expert here. Can you tell me what that transition was like? Were you treated with respect in the State House?
You know, I have been lucky all my life in so many respects. But when I came to the General Assembly, it was one of the luckiest things that had happened, because we as a class talked about who was going to run for office, and I was one that said, Gene, we want you to think about the House of Representatives, but you had to pay your dues and work on other campaigns and so forth. So in 1974, I decided I was going to file, and I did, and it was an at-large. You know, Richland had 11 seats. You ran at-large in the county. But the seeds were coming of single-member districts, and a suit was brought, and the suit was won, and South Carolina's House of Representatives had to be divided into single-member districts. And I got to be a part of a group that tried to carve their districts out, and I did a pretty good job for mine. And so we ran in single-member districts. That place was a bastion of white males, and suddenly in this 52 new people out of 124. There were Republicans, there were Democrats, there were whites, there were blacks. IS had broken open Richland County with Jim Felder two years before he won, and then we call it the McGovern landslide came along, and all the Democrats got out. The year we put McGovern as our standard bearer. So IS lost that year, but then he came back the year that I came in year 74, and we were single-member districts. So that group of freshmen, of which I was a part, we had enormous influence. In fact, they were scared we were going to run one of us for speaker. And I wonder why we didn't, except we were so glad to be there and glad to have a group of us that were all new, that we felt like there's strength in numbers. So we figured out how the rules work. We got ourselves on important committees, and we really became a force to be reckoned with on that House floor. So the gender thing ended up almost being something that the House was telling the Senate, this is how we do, because we had about 9 women, and that was just unheard of to have that many women in a legislative body any place in the South. So I was lucky to come in at a time when we were beginning to have some promise, and of course it was right in the midst of the debate about the Equal Rights Amendment, and though we never passed it, we pricked the conscience of that General Assembly so much that we passed a lot of good things as a result of the debate we had about the Equal Rights Amendment. So it really was an improbable start, but a lucky one.
So you're there for 13 years, Jean. I mean, that's quite a time, isn't it? Anything you're really proud of during your time in 13 years? Like something that you say, yeah, that was a real moment, a signal achievement that I initiated?
Well, the big amendments, home rule, judicial reform, creating the family court system, reforming the way the utilities just absolutely, they're getting a chokehold game at them. We set up a merit selection commission, not just for judges, but for the selection of people who were going to run for the Public Service Commission. We changed a whole lot about what had to be heard in public about how they operated and how rates were set. But ethics legislation, that was all that freshman class deciding that we were going to finally have the beginnings of an ethics law.
So did you get a lot of pushback on this? I mean, I can't imagine that these things went down easily.
No, they were tough battles. And, you know, they had filibusters at that time, and you could barely break one because it took 80-something votes to break a filibuster. That first year, we got so mad about having to stay up all night with all those people getting drunk and going crazy and not doing anything. We finally said, we're taking over the Rules Committee. I sat that summer and wrote up some new rules, and we changed the filibuster rules to not having but 68 to break the filibusters. Just changed the whole way the place operated. Now, it didn't happen overnight, and there were all kinds of ups and downs and political strains and so forth. But we modernized and forced that older crowd to let us in and modernize how we did business. And of course, the Freedom of Information Act, which was one of I brought the first FOIA case in the state before we had the big new FOI. We had a sunshine law, but we didn't have anything really comprehensive like we do now. I lost the first case I brought where they, in secret, closed Booker T. Washington High School. I was so angry about that. I said, Jay Bender, I'm going to the legislature and get elected and change how they do that. And it's the first thing I did. So those kind of things, those big changes that modernized and reached out and involved more people, those were proud moments. But some of the other proud moments were, getting Ernest Finney elected to the South Carolina Supreme Court, getting him elected as a circuit court judge, being on the team that helped push the selection of Matthew Perry as a member of the Military Court of Appeals. Turned out to be one of my best friends as I became a judge. I mean, those were huge accomplishments. And it turned out that not everybody in small rural towns, or even people who were not of the same party, had those old antediluvian ideas about race and gender. It turned out a lot of people had progressive ideas, more than you just assume by checking somebody off if they live in a small place. A lot of good people came with a lot of progressive thinking from some of the smallest communities in the state.
What I'm hearing here is
wonderful years for me. I love the General Assembly.
I can tell you loved it.
Just loved it.
I'm hearing strong-willed right now. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, there were a lot of stuff. I mean, Bob Shaheen was a groundbreaking speaker, without a doubt. That's another thing that just really set us forward so much in terms of looking at a more professional way and an open way to adopt legislation.
I'll not linger on this anymore, but I'm just curious. Who did you lock horns with most?
Oh, gosh, the old barons of the Senate, and I was on all the important conference committees, and they just hated to see me coming. Marion Gressett, oh, man.
Who was the most difficult to deal with?
Well, I didn't consider it difficult. I really enjoyed the fray. Marion Gressett is one of the smartest people up there. He was strategic, thought 5 chess moves away from where you were. At that time, knew the rules of court up one side and down the other. That's the first thing I did, was learn those rules. That became my expertise. Because that's the only way you could have a chance of playing on the playing field with some of those senators that had been there for so long.
Yeah, the Glenn McConnell rule, right?
Exactly,
Learn everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it ended up, he respected me. And we had our Versailles moment and had peace, and we did some things together that were really good for the people.
That's very encouraging to hear. Let's move forward a bit. You're the Supreme Court. That must have been an amazing point in your life.
I pinched myself. I couldn't believe it. When I walked on those marble corridors in the old post office that first day, I thought about a little girl that used to take her skates. We skated all around Columbia. Little remember those days we used to love to get our skates and skate on the smooth sidewalks. And one day I sneaked up those marble stairs and skated on that marble foyer. And the postmaster caught me, called Papa, whose office was right across the street in the Palmetto State Life building, and said, "She's at it again." So she told me she would not do that again. And I thought about that little girl when I walked into that foyer as a member of the South Carolina Supreme Court. And I really was just almost overwhelmed with the thought.
Yeah, I was going through the newspapers and the signature smile, the beaming pride, it just screamed out. What kind of learning curve is there, Jean, when you join the Supreme Court? Is it difficult, or do you know a lot already when you're going in, or the protocols of being a member of the Supreme Court?
Oh, gosh, it's a big learning curve. And the thing is, at that time, we only had one law clerk apiece. The Court of Appeals had just been created, and it was kind of an overflow court. They might hear 400 cases a year. We had all the rest of them. It was an overwhelming workload. And in addition, a huge agenda of things that the court has to rule on, motions and things of that nature. The workload was something fierce. Man, I'm telling you, I was reading things all night long and all day long to just feel like I could do it. I did have the advantage that I had done a lot of appellate work as a lawyer. And so, the reading all those transcripts and reading this and diving into the books was something I liked to do and that I was used to. But the learning curve, and of course the unwritten protocols of the court and the way business is done and what it takes to persuade another were all very new to me. And I'm sitting here, 44-year-old woman. I was not exactly who everybody wanted to see come on that court. They had a little learning curve too.
I'm sure they did. And so you've been involved with some very high-profile cases, and quite recently at that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not going to mention that because I promised myself. But you have argued before the United States Supreme Court.
I was on the team that presented the Catawba case. I was not the principal, but they let us split. That was very unusual. But, you talk about something that'll take your breath away. When you are seated at counsel table, you sit at a back table and then you move up, and then you're there as your case is called. If I had one more arm as long as the arm I've got, I could have touched Ruth Ginsburg as I sat there. I mean, it's a when you look at the pictures of it, it's such a formal and, powerful looking place. But it's a very intimate setting when you are there and presenting a case and at the podium. And frankly, by the time you get to a case like that, you are so steeped in the cases and the questions, and you, we were up there a week before we argued that case. We had moot courts up one side and down the other. There wasn't any question that ended up being asked that we didn't have some responses to. But just the feeling of being in that setting is just amazing.
Was it quite nerve-wracking?
Oh, yeah. Gosh.
I should imagine. Right?
But then you get to it.
Right.
Right.
And you develop relationships with...
Oh, yes.
So could you talk about
Justice
that?
O'Connor and Justice Ginsburg were good friends and used that cachet that they have been at the highest level to reach out to women in such a great way. But Ruth helped me with Vicki Esslinger's Senate Page case when she was still just a young professor at Columbia and Rutgers. Vicki came to me with the case where she'd been appointed by Senator Bristow as a page and they wouldn't seat her. And gosh, I was so dumb that I had not realized that in gender discrimination at that time, the test was not the tough case it was for racial discrimination. If you have to have a compelling state interest to justify treating the races separately or differently. The test for gender discrimination was just a rational relation between the discrimination and a legitimate state object to be achieved. And you want to know what they argued for that one? That the women would have to go to the hotel and motel rooms of the senators to deliver papers in the evening, and that might compromise the virtue of the senators. They put that in those pleadings. They put that in those pleadings. How about that? And that gave rise to one thing that almost terrified me, got me out to practice the law. We argued a motion for summary judgment in that case, and I was arguing it. And we got to this issue about the motel and the hotel room. So I said, now, Your Honor, arguing in front of Robert Hemphill, very crusty judge, one of my father's best friends, but a fierce somebody who didn't approve of these gender cases at all. I said, as to the hotel and motel rooms, Your Honor, he said, oh, just Mrs. Toal, isn't that what your client really wants? I was so taken aback. I said, everything ran through my mind, but asked him to recuse himself. What do you do? Finally, I just said, Your Honor, I think that is very unfair to my client. And then I went on with my argument. The next day, I pulled the paper out of the front yard early in the morning and opened it up, and there's this big article in the newspaper with a picture of Robert Hemphill in his robe. And the inscription over the top of it is, impropriety on the bench. I said, oh, God, I'm never going to be able to go to federal court again. And they took him to task. They didn't like the gender case worth a darn. It's a state newspaper, in the early 70s or late 60s. I guess it was 69. So they didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for a gender case, but they thought it was awfully bad of him to say that ugly thing about the virtue of a woman. So they had something to say about that. I thought, golly. So I went to the office. Of course, as soon as I get there, one of the partners in the firm, G.D. Toal, we told you not to take that case. What the hell? We'll never be able to practice. Hemphill is our local judge here. What in that you done? So I'm sitting there just kind of thinking, oh, my Lord. And in comes a federal marshal and says, Gene, I have a bench warrant for you. I said, a bench warrant? You mean to put me under arrest? He said, yeah. He said, I'm not going to put the cuffs on, but you got to come in the cruiser and go with me up to the federal courthouse. I said, you got to be kidding. I said, now wait a doggone minute. I'm calling the lawyer for the Attorney General and find out what the hell is going on with this. So I called Mike Tye at the Attorney General's. He said, don't start talking to me, Toal. I got a marshal in my office that's taking me up there and going to take my client. And I bet if you call Esslinger, she's going to tell you she's got a marshal on her doorstep taking her up there too. We get up to the federal court. Hemphill gets on the bench, says something to the effect of, well, if you think I said what you think I said, I didn't say it, or words to that effect, and then rustles off that bench so quick his robes are just flying out behind him and recuses himself. I looked over in the jury box, and there sits Susie Marshall, who is an old, hard-bitten police reporter for the Columbia Record. She had been there for that argument, and she was so mad about that thing. She went back to the editorial room of the state newspaper, and she said, I'm going to resign and raise hell with all of you and maybe even bring a lawsuit unless you write an editorial saying how terrible that was. And that's why that editorial got written. And I survived it. Hemphill forgave me. Took a while.
I never thought we'd hear the phrase, the virtue of South Carolina state senators in this conversation.
I know. So improbable.
It's highly unlikely. In a few minutes, I'm going to invite questions from the audience, and they can write down their questions, and somebody will gather them, and we'll ask a few. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions just to finish it up from my end first. So, I mean, you're sometimes under the microscope, Jean, in your career. I mean, I did not know about the Federal Marshal, which is a different kind of microscope, but how do you handle that as a judge? I mean, the pressure must be enormous. Day after day, front page of the newspaper. Do you read the newspapers, or do you try and quarantine it, or do you... How do you manage it?
Avidly. Love newspapers.
All right.
Read them all the time. I recently did something I thought I would never do.
All right.
I subscribed to Fitz News.
You know his circulation just went way up there, don't you, right?
Well, you know, I had that case whose name should never be spoken in polite company, and so somebody told me, Gene, you ought to at least look at this. They're doing the best writing about this thing. So I said, well, okay. And, you know, I had all that press there to kind of wrangle with that thing. Thank God I had my old law partner, Jay Bender, to really get the press in order and handle everything, and it all worked out great. Behaved like a perfect gentleman.
Hmm. Well, he did take my Civil War class many years ago. Perhaps that...
Well, you might have had a little
just a bit. Very bright.
But, you know, scrutiny is what you buy into. If you want to be in public life, you buy that. And I've made plenty of mistakes in my personal life, and they've all been right out there in the public for the public to look at. And if you do something you're not supposed to do, you just got to suck it up and talk about it and apologize for it and try to figure out how to be a little better.
That's a very healthy lesson, I think.
You know, but that's just what you do.
Right.
But the public's got a right to know what their public folks do.
Yeah.
And I stand by that.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Are you optimistic about the future of South Carolina politics and women in particular, and law and politics?
Oh, yeah.
Are you hopeful?
Oh, yeah. You know, now you're talking to somebody who's the eternal optimist. But to me, there are tsunamis of change. Mm-hmm. And you get up at that crest, and then there's a low point, and you come back up.
Yeah.
And I think we're in one of those troughs. But when I think of people like my youngest daughter who sits here, and her two children who are 8 and 10, and how expanded their mind is, and what they think about at this age, about what's really important, and what they want to learn about, and what they want the world to be like that they're going to live in, I am extremely optimistic. This week, you know, again, in my childhood, to grow up in a town where segregation was the law, and now we're not there yet. Our glass ceiling as women hadn't been cracked totally, but the world is so different than it was in the 40s and the 50s when I was a little girl. And it's not a straight progression up this way, but we're coming back up to a crest in my view. So I'm the eternal optimist. If you asking the wrong person if you think I'm going to say that things are going to get worse. I think we get coming out of it.
I promised the Dean that I'd ask you questions for about 35, 40 minutes, and I'm one to obey my Dean.
Yes, sir.
So I would like to open this up to questions from the audience. And magically, thank you, the questions have appeared.
Good.
And I think I'll just take them in order. All right, here's the first question. Could you serve on a jury when you were first admitted to the bar?
No, I could not. Thank you for that question. I could try a case to a jury, but women didn't get on South Carolina juries until I had been in practice almost a year. And it was a woman, a Republican, Carolyn Frederick of Greenville, who was in the House of Representatives, who finally shamed those men into ratifying the 19th Amendment to the Constitution and passing an amendment that would open up jury service to women. How about that?
Fascinating. And these are very good questions. Perhaps I shouldn't be doing this job. So the second one is, what are your thoughts on reproductive rights and the state constitution?
You know, I will surprise some of you. My daughter's laughing because she knows what the answer is going to be. I am a pro-life Catholic. I was endorsed by Citizens for Life every time I ran for the judgeship I held. I certainly don't believe, as a matter of dogma, everything that the pro-life arena holds now politically. But the first decision the Supreme Court made was a mess. 5 different opinions. What they were asked to do was to look at our right to privacy provision in the South Carolina Constitution and apply it in this situation involving the right to abortion. The first question that, of course, is asked is, what does that provision mean? And what was it aimed at when it was adopted? Miraculously, in South Carolina, we have got something that they don't even have, except for the Federalist Papers and the U.S. Constitution. We have a complete transcription of the deliberations of the West Committee for 3 years, a verbatim transcript of everything that was said when the West Committee met and rewrote the Constitution of 1895. And so we know exactly why that right to privacy provision was put in there, because we've got the testimony and the discussion of the members of the commission about what they were doing. And the reason it was put in there was because of concern about electronic surveillance and wiretapping. And that's very clear if you read the West report. So when those opinions were written, 2 of the opinions that upheld the abortion, that struck down the abortion law on the basis that the South Carolina Constitution was offended by the law, interpreted that right to privacy provision as including this issue. But the truth about the matter is the West Committee report will let you know that it was not meant to include that. John Kittredge wrote an opinion about that that went by what the West Committee said. The West Committee was the gold standard. That's what we've always used to interpret South Carolina's Constitution. So he used the correct interpretive tool. 2 of the opinions said, one, I'm not going to go by the West Committee because there were no women on it. Well, that isn't true. Sarah Leverett, my wonderful mentor and the librarian at the law school, was on the West Committee, and West was so impressed with her that he put her as the first woman on the Workers' Compensation Commission. So that part was historically not correct. The second was there was no black representation. Don Beatty is correct about that, although the advisory committee did have 3 black members, and they had a great deal to do with the drafting of some of the provisions, including this one. So, you know, we didn't use in the majority opinions, in what became the majority of 5 different opinions, we didn't use the tools that we have traditionally used to interpret our Constitution, which is the transcript of the West Committee. Now, did they do the right thing is a different question. And the vast majority of South Carolinians, and several surveys have been done, think they did the right thing. Isn't that interesting? Because South Carolina is such a red state in many ways. But this issue really divides people in a way that is not defined strictly by party. And it causes me to do a lot of thinking. The one time I had to really search my conscience about this issue as a member of the General Assembly was not on abortion, because that wasn't really an issue during my service. But a living will was definitely an issue. And for several years, Bob Shaheen and I opposed the living will bill. We just couldn't, as Catholics, see how you could sign a law like that. And finally, I said, Bob, you know what we ought to do? We ought to go see Sister Mary Jacobs. She runs the biggest Catholic hospital in South Carolina. And surely the Catholic hospitals have looked at this thing. By gum, they have not only looked at it, they come up with a consent, a form expressing your views about withdrawing artificial means of support. They approved it. It had the imprimatur of the Bishop of Baltimore. And we got the brief that the Diocese of New York had filed in the Karen Ann Quinlan case supporting the parents' request that artificial means of support for her be withdrawn. So the church's position turned out to be complex and very nuanced on that issue. So by gum, I got that hold of that. I went to the floor leaders. I said, you're not going to believe this, but Shaheen and I are going to support the bill if you do one thing. Use this as your form. It's the Catholic Hospital Association's Right to Life form. And by gum, we passed it. So, you know, the beliefs are one thing. Excuse me. That was for you. All right. Your beliefs are one thing, but sometimes they're a lot more nuanced than people think.
Thank you, Jean. We've got time for two more, and the next one piggybacks on what you just said. We are now living in an era of extreme political partisanship. How can we best return to an age of politics where people of opposite views still respect one another?
You know, it's not easy. We know from history that the appeal of an autocrat or a demagogue is, history tells us that from way back when, not just in fairly modern history in our world. But good people just have to keep trying to promote public conversation in a way that allows for the development of policy based on what people think and not what they hate. And we're coming out of that. A lot of people are sick and to death with the negativity and the everything framed in terms of who you hate or who's different. And I will tell you, in the younger generation, in my young grandchildren, in my daughter's generation, there's a lot more holding people accountable if they say ugly things just because it makes them feel better than somebody. So I think the conversation will change. I am not discouraged about where we are.
All right, Jean, our last question. What are your thoughts on the selection of judges?
Well, the Senate called me back 3 different times to talk about this issue recently, and I finally told them that would I have to run for Senator Harpootlian's seat, or were they going to leave me alone? He popped up immediately and said, I drew you out of my district. And I said, well, I ain't coming back here anyway. But what I was asked to do was to give some history about how we came to the method of selection we have. Sandra Day O'Connor led an effort after she retired from the court to talk about state court judicial selection. She came from a state that popularly elected judges. She thought it was terrible, money-driven, all the things you don't want a judge was to be driven by the money they receive to run. We know that's a terrible system. Gubernatorial selection in its purest form is just one person's politics for a lot of people's politics. She had a lot, people are horrified when you first tell them legislative selection. Oh, that's got to be the most terrible, corrupt, awful thing in the world. But legislative selection process gives the voice of the people acknowledgement and respect if it is coupled with a vetting system that makes sense and is not manipulated. We had no merit selection system when I first came into the General Assembly. It was one of the biggest reforms my freshman class put in, was to begin this process of a vetting system to look at qualifications, make them file financial statements, look at their background and so forth. And that really evolved over time. There's a lot that's good about the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, but we've got the problem now, and this is what I've told the Senate committee. The general public they are frustrated with that part of the system because they don't believe it's fair. And if public confidence is going to be recaptured, you're not going to change the Constitution easily, but you could change a lot about this Judicial Merit Selection Commission. I got it put in the Constitution when I was chief because I wanted to protect that vetting system from just going out if the legislature just decided one day they wanted to abolish it. But it can be improved dramatically if it becomes a more independent group of people doing the vetting. And a lot of states do it that way, where they have the political process in play, but the front end of the process is a vetting process that is not as political. We can do that, and I think we're going to do that. So my message to them was, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Do the thing you can most quickly and most effectively do. Look at this Judicial Merit Selection Commission and get some gubernatorial appointments on there and get some people who are not legislators on there. And let's have a group of people that the public can have some confidence in. And I think they're going to do that.
Jean, as always, you've taught us a great deal. You've shared much. Congratulations on being the 2024 McNair Honoree. Thank you.
That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.